Last month, my cousin and I ventured north to explore the beautiful Canadian Rockies. As a landscape photographer, this is the kind of place that dreams are made of. Epic mountain ranges covered in snow, breathtaking vistas, and new adventures around every corner. And in this video, we'll be taking a look at my 5 favorite photos from this trip. I'll be breaking down the gear I use, the techniques, as well as other helpful tips that you can use should you choose to visit this area. So let's get into it.
I'm living on the bright side, looking for that good life. Everything is alright, riding on that golden wave, swimming in a fresh blue, pussy feeling brand new. Sun is about to break through. Ooh, I love the world today.
So first things first, it feels really good to be back on this channel. It's been quite the hiatus here. I've really been taking the past few months to kind of dial in the content on this channel of what really drives me and pushes me creatively, and what also would be entertaining for you guys to want to watch. I'm also super excited to be taking you guys with me on some really cool adventures, as well as sharing a bunch of awesome tips for you photographers out there. So speaking of exploring new places, this was my first big trip of 2023. We flew into Calgary and began our 3-day trip to explore all that this part of Canada has to offer in high spirits. The bulk of our trip took place along the Alberta-British Columbia border, north of famous resort town Banff in Lake Louise. We used the charming little town of Field, British Columbia as sort of a home base. Now this little town is awesome for all you guys who are on a budget out there who are looking to stay close by to Lake Louise but don't want to deal with the inflated prices that come with pretty much all the accommodations there. Field is about 20 minutes away from all the action in Lake Louise, and it's a super pretty drive too. We visited in end of March, early April, so really the shoulder season in spring. What is significant about that, it is much more affordable to visit this time of the year compared to other times like peak season in the summer, and also it is much less busy and crowded. We saw hardly any people. There's a downside though, that a lot of the roads there are seasonal. We're talking like May through October is basically when they're open. So if you choose to come there in the spring or winter, unfortunately a lot of these roads are going to be closed off, and a lot of areas that have some amazing hikes and viewpoints and photo taking opportunities just won't be accessible to you around this time of the year. But with that being said, there is still plenty of stuff to do if you know where to look. Also, the weather can be really a mixed bag this time of year. You can get everything from pretty mild spring days all the way to frigid cold temperatures and random blizzards and snowstorms. Overall, we had warmer than normal temperatures, saw some sunshine, saw some snow showers that were in the sun too. So all that being said, just if you visit here in the spring, be prepared with a bunch of layers. It could be warm one moment, then if you climb a mountain, it could be freezing cold and snowing the next. So just come prepared with lots of layers. Okay, that's enough of me rambling on. Let's dive into these pictures, my 5 favorite photos from the trip, starting off with actually the last picture that I snapped on my camera here of the entire trip. Happened to be one of my favorites. So first up, we have one of the absolute most photographed locations in all of British Columbia. This is the Cilantro Cafe Cabin on Emerald Lake. Now make no bones about it, this location is absolutely beautiful all year round, but there's just something special about it in the wintertime when the lake freezes over. There are a couple of things that I like to do when visiting very popular photography destinations. Think Horseshoe Bend, Arizona, maybe Angel Oak, South Carolina, locations where there's just that one picture to get. And those 2 things are, number 1, pretty much a no-brainer, arrive when there are the least amount of other people there, basically. So this could differ from place to place, but in general, when a park just opens or at sunrise or at sunset can be the best time where there are the least amount of other people that can interfere with getting your shot, and it just is overall a more peaceful and serene experience. And number 2 is always looking for something that is going to make the picture your own. You just scroll through Instagram, you see the same picture over and over and over again of an iconic location. So what is going to make yours stand out? Well, this could be a number of different things. It could be an interesting foreground. It could be using a different type of lens than most people use. It could be the weather conditions at that time, an epic sunrise, a sunset. There are many different things that can really make your photo unique. And what oftentimes works really well is just experiment and try out a whole bunch of different things and see what works for that given situation. So in the case of this particular photo, I arrived right at dusk to make sure that A, there weren't a lot of people around, and B, to take advantage of blue hour that add that extra drama and dimension to the photo, really accentuating the feeling of returning home to a cozy cabin in like a winter wonderland. Now, what I did in the case of this particular photo to give it that extra touch of personality was to experiment around with different foregrounds, specifically ultra wide angle foregrounds. I found that the combination of an ultra-wide-angle lens with a snowy waterline in the foreground did the trick perfectly. It really pushed back the cabin and made it less of the center of attention and kind of made it blend into the background of the scene a little bit more. Now, we also came here to explore this lake in the morning time. On our first morning, actually, the sunrise, we walked across the lake. It was absolutely spectacular. However, I felt like the conditions and the sunrise didn't quite match up with the feeling I was going for of a cozy cabin. I felt like the Blue Hour image just really spoke to me more in that way. One of the best things to do when visiting Lake Louise is to explore and go on a hike. There are several great ones that start from the famous lakeside hotel, including Tea House and the one we decided to embark on, the epic Plain of Six Glaciers hike. Now, this is an awesome hike. This is a hike where you begin walking over the frozen lake and you eventually ascend your way up to this amazing plateau with glacier ice kind of overhanging over top. It is serene and amazing. Footing and grip is absolutely essential out here, so please, please, please invest in a pair of ice crampons. It will make your life so much easier, especially when you get to the steep and icy parts. And in general, hiking in the winter really does require a lot more planning than hiking in really any other time of the year, because the trail could be completely covered with snow in some places, and you would really need to have a great grasp on where exactly you're going on the trail, what your location is, as well as keeping an eye on the weather conditions, because they can change in the blink of an eye in the wintertime. And of course, avalanches. No one wants to get stuck under an avalanche. On this trip, we actually walked over an old avalanche site where you could just see the little tips of the trees peeking out over top as we walked over. But of course, the benefit of winter hiking is that more than likely you will have the entire trail to yourself. We only ran into a handful of other hikers the entire time. The conditions that morning were just awe-inspiring. And about halfway on the ascent, I captured my favorite photo from the entire trek. Something that all of my favorite landscape images have in common is that they share a captivating sense of drama or epicness that really just makes me stop and say, wow. I would say this particular photo is about the closest I got to replicating that on this trip. So I had a couple of key factors that I was really working with when making this photo to kind of convey that sense of epicness or that sense of drama. Number one was a high level of contrast. We had about the highest level of contrast you can get in the natural world. You had bright white snow reflecting the sunlight as white as you can possibly get, with dark shadows from the mountain ridges right next to it. And that created an extremely sharp and jagged line in this photo. And I think the stark difference really helps create a jarring effect in the image, and it really helps capture the eye at first glance and promote curiosity to scan over the image further and figure out exactly what's going on in it. Another great tool to convey a sense of drama is to include familiar objects within a landscape that have a direct size comparison to other objects. For example, in this image, I used the two fellow hikers in the valley here to show a sense of scale when compared to the mountains in the background. See, if I remove them like this, the mountains suddenly lose their scale and become much more difficult for the viewer to fully grasp the sheer size of them. So here's another example of this from my trip to Alaska a few winters ago. Here are some hikers returning from a massive glacier. If I remove them from the image loses context and scale, and it becomes a little more difficult to size up the various elements within the composition. One of the most beautiful things about visiting the Canadian Rockies is being able to see the spectacular blue lakes that even give the tropical waters of the Caribbean a run for their money. Now, unfortunately, with it not being warm enough yet for all of these bodies of water to completely melt, we had to make do with these vast open expanses of frozen water. However, that's not to say we ended up coming up completely empty-handed, because about 10 minutes away from our home base and field is Natural Bridge. Here we chased the setting sun and got out of the car to explore the area. We actually ended up being able to walk into the mouth of the waterfall and see some of the only flowing water of the entire trip. A bit further down, we came across a section that was just perfect for some long exposure photography. So I got out my camera and tripod and I got this photo. Now, this was one of the last photos from my trip, and up to this point, I had not felt as though I had captured an image that was quintessentially Canada in springtime. To me, that statement evokes images of mainly melting snow of winter turning into what will become the beautiful blue lakes of summer. Now, this image taken at Natural Bridge, I feel, is a great representation of that, and while I'm not 100% in love with the composition itself, I feel like it's a little bit lopsided. I feel that having a splash of blue color helps liven up the photo and really make it stand out from anything else that I took during the entire trip. Now, there were two things that were just absolutely essential in the making of this photo. That was a tripod and an ND neutral density filter. Now, I used this neutral density filter right here to slow down my shutter speed so I could really capture the movement of the water, blur it out, and really have those rocks underneath kind of pop out more. And of course, when taking any long exposure photo, you would really need a solid base, so the tripod came in handy for that. I would say I took about 90% of the photos on this trip completely handheld. I've really been kind of falling out of love of the idea of using a tripod and carrying it around everywhere, but I guess that can be a different topic for another video. Okay, let's drive up the road a little bit and revisit nearby Emerald Lake again, this time in the morning, where we saw one of the best sunrises of the entire trip. We ventured off the beaten path a little bit with only a little bit of snow in our boots, and came across this ideal opportunity to break out my ultra-wide angle zoom lens and capture a vertical image. I tried using the rocks in the foreground as a bit of stepping stones, as it were, to frame up Mount Burgess there right in the background, and the interesting cloud patterns in the sky that morning were just the cherry on top of this one. Ultra wide angle lenses like this are responsible for really some of my favorite photos that I've taken over the years. The ability to fit so much landscape into the frame gives the opportunity to show off all three elements of a photo in their full glory: the foreground, midground/subject, and the background or sky. Now with this image on Emerald Lake, I feel that the rocks on the foreground here really steal the show. I like how they almost seem to tumble right at the viewer and roll right up to your feet. Now a thing to note with ultra wide angle lenses like this is that they tend to accentuate the foreground and the sky quite a bit and push back or minimize anything that is in the center of the image or your midground. This of course can all be an artistic choice though, and I find that ultra wides work best when paired with an interesting foreground and an epic sky. Speaking of sky, when your drone just doesn't cut it, sometimes you just gotta spread your wings and get up there and experience it for yourself. It wasn't until about a week later when I was home and going through the photos and editing them that I came across this photo. Now, as photographers, I'm sure we all know about the term spray and pray. This basically means quantity over quality, taking as many pictures as you can, as quickly as you can, to try and capture the moment, and then keeping your fingers crossed, praying that when you get home, that at least one of them you hopefully capture that exact moment, that money shot, if you will. Now, this strategy is only viable in, I think, a select few situations. I would generally always say, if you have the time to, just to line up an actual composition. I think you're going to be a lot happier with the photo that you come away with. However, in certain situations when you're, flying through the mountaintops at about 100 miles an hour, and you only have a couple of seconds before the composition that you just saw flies by and there's a brand new one there, this is the type of situation where I could see spray and pray working very well, and that's exactly what I did with my A7C right here. I think that this particular photo sums up the trip to a T. It really has everything that I'm looking for. It has the natural beauty of the Canadian Rockies with the snow-capped peaks. It really has a sense of drama and adventure to it. It has a solid composition that is well balanced and interesting to look at, and I feel that it really has that wow factor and uniqueness that you don't typically see with other photos in this area having. The spray and pray method almost feels like a treasure hunt when you get back home and start to look through all the photos, because you never know exactly which one you could come away with. Sometimes I took pictures that I didn't even remember taking because you take so many of them in a short, kind of frantic state. Now, this is my third time being kind of up in an aircraft taking photos with like a mirrorless camera that is not a drone, and over those 3 times, some tips that I would have would be: A, bring your most versatile lens in terms of focal length, something that gives you both a wide angle perspective and also zooming into kind of a short telephoto if you have it. And I'm telling you, it is really annoying to try and change lenses when you're in the air there. You only have a finite amount of time and you want to maximize every single second of that time that you have. So not being able to switch lenses, having a lens that can kind of do it all, is very important in that certain situation. And B, I would say make sure that your shutter speed is high enough to compensate for all of the vibrations and movement that you're going to be experiencing when flying in a small aircraft like a helicopter or a bush plane. I would much rather have a higher ISO value and a really fast shutter speed that just locks in my photo and perfectly freezes it, versus a lower and cleaner ISO image, but have a slower shutter speed as a result, creating more chance for a blurred image. You can always save ISO in post. Much harder to save a blurry image in post due to movement. Well, that about sums up this video. Those are my 5 favorite photos taken from my trip to the Canadian Rockies. Now, I hope you were able to get some useful tips and information out of this video. If you are a lover of winter photography, the mountains in general, I would really recommend moving Banff and Lake Louise, that whole kind of area of the Canadian Rockies, all the way up to your bucket list, because it is one of the most spectacular places I have ever visited, and I am chomping at the bit to get back there in the summertime when everything is back opened up, to just see it in a completely different light, to see those blue lakes. And please let me know in the comments what you thought of this new video format. I would really appreciate your feedback on that. And also, while you're down there, if you wouldn't mind, let me know what your favorite place to visit in the Canadian Rockies is. I would really like to check it out next time I go there. So again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.